Hello and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with Joe Lalo. And Jeff is gone this week. He's in Vegas, so he's doing really serious professional things, I'm sure. But we have a guest for you, Elliott Kay. He grew up in Los Angeles and currently resides in Seattle, Washington. He has a bachelor's degree in history and is a former member of the U.S. Coast Guard. He's survived a motorcycle crash, severe seasickness, summers in Phoenix, and winters in Seattle. And he also writes some books. He's the author of the very popular Poor Man's Fight Sci-Fi series, and he also has several fantasy novels. Hello, Elliott. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Do you want to start out telling us kind of how you got started writing and what led you to self-publishing?
When I was a little kid, I really liked to draw a lot, and I wasn't terribly good at it, but it was the way to keep myself amused in daycare and stuff. I would, draw Star Wars pictures or World War II pictures and make little exploding noises to keep myself amused during free time or whatever they called that. And there was always a little story in my head. And I really wanted to be a comic book artist, and eventually I realized I didn't have a natural talent for that, but I could do the story part. And my teachers figured that out too, so I always got kind of pushed to doing creative writing stuff in school, and I wrote like a fantasy satire of my high school life when I was in high school. It came out to like 100 pages or something like that, which is a lot for a high school kid. And eventually life happened. I tried to be an adult. I put the writing aside except for when it was useful in my embarrassing career as a live-action role player, but I did a lot there, which kind of amounts to fanfic. And eventually I just decided it was time to really get serious about this and try to write that book that I had always wanted to write. Poor Man's Fight was kicking around in my head for probably about 15 years. I think I was halfway through the Coast Guard when I started having the genesis of that idea. But it was only about 5 years ago I got more serious about it, and I was kicking around on a website called Literotica, where they you put up lots of free stories, which are, let's face it, they're smutty, and I was fine with that. And I kind of did that more for practice and to get people who didn't know me to read my writing and get some feedback from that, because my friends were always very supportive. But that went really well, and that actually became my first book even before I finished Poor Man's Fight.
So just to be clear, your teachers saw your drawing and they said you should be a writer.
No, I kind of gave up on the writing thing. I'm not sure where my teachers came up with that connection, but they did. I don't know. Maybe I was a little more creative with my classwork or something, but I'd always get these extra assignments where they would say, okay, so we're all going to write these things, and Elliott, you're gonna write a story about this. And why am I writing a story about this? Well, because you can. Okay. So, it's strange, but it happened.
You could probably write intelligent sentences, which I didn't find out until much later was not a thing that everybody in high school did. So the teachers were like so excited when they got someone like that. Yeah.
Yeah, there was that. I started reading comic books really early on. I think the original G.I. Joe comic taught me to read, basically, and then I kind of transitioned from that into X-Men and stuff. And Chris Claremont was the master of the grammatically correct run-on sentence. And I picked up on that and I started mimicking it. So yeah, my sentence structure got really good at a really early age, largely because of X-Men monologues, I think.
Who says comic books aren't good for you?
Right? They're very good for you.
So how did you go from being on that Literotica site to actually, did you try to get an agent or did you just go straight to self-publishing?
I went to straight self-publishing. So Good Intentions was is my first urban fantasy book, and it was written as a serial format. And it was really, like I said, it was one of those things. I was, I think, a third of the way through the original manuscript for Poor Man's Fight, and I got stumped on a minor point of character development. And I just figured, well, I don't know what to do with this. And my girlfriend told me, well, as long as you keep writing, I mean, just write something else. I said, okay. I like trashy stories. There's this site. and so I put up a few chapters, but it had a plot and it had characters that had personalities and character arcs and stuff, and I got a lot of instant feedback, and it did really really well on that site. It I was in the top the top of the reader voting average for a good long while with that series. And when I was finished with it, it was about 200,000 words, which is a big book basically in book terms. And I realized I was never going to get an agent to touch this because it's way too big. It's kind of all over the place within categories too. It's urban fantasy, except it's also paranormal romance, and that's a very blurry line itself. But it was comedic, but it was erotic, and there was a whole lot of action stuff, and it also gets really existential in a lot of places. I didn't expect to do a whole lot of morality and divinity stuff when I was starting out this story about basically just a silly erotic urban fantasy story, but I did, and I didn't like all of what I would have to do to chop it up to send it to agents. And I'd also been told at the time, I mean, this was late 2011, I think. A lot of people who wrote had told me, yeah, if something's popular online, agents and publishers generally don't want it. I had no idea if that was actually true at the time, but it was what I had heard. And so I figured, I know a couple of people who self-publish. I'll talk to them. And one of them pointed out, if you only make 6 sales, that's 6 people who would not have read your book if you had never put it out. And I thought, okay, cool. So I put it up, and it paid the rent for a month or two. It covered a seasonal gap in my finances that I had been struggling with for a long time. I'd been substitute teaching, so it paid the summer bills. And from there, I decided that I just liked self-publishing. I liked being in control. I didn't like all the hoops you have to jump through to do traditional publishing. I kind of looked at that and I thought, I just want people to read my books. And so when Poor Man's Fight was done, I sent it to an open call at Harper Voyager, I think, and they had said, hey, if you don't hear from us in 3 months, you're not gonna. And I didn't hear from them in 3 months. Turned out they had a huge influx of submissions, and so they had extended their deadline, but I didn't know it. So that 3 months went up, and I said, well, the hell with it, I'll self-publish it. And Poor Man's Fight, I think largely on the basis of the following that I had from Good Intentions, took off really fast, and it did really, really well. I was #1 in Sci-Fi on Amazon for 3 glorious hours on a Friday at one point, but I was also kicking around in the top 10 for a good month and a half.
All right, cool. Well, we're going to ask you some marketing stuff later on.
Okay.
Find out how you're getting those 3 hours in the spotlight there.
Right.
No, but for those who haven't checked you out yet, Elliott's books have like hundreds of reviews, and they're still selling. That's like 4 years, I think, 5 years since you published the first one, I guess, 2011.
Yeah, it's still going strong. So one of the things that I've seen is when people say the best promo for your books is to write a new book, that has absolutely been true in my case at least. I mean, all of this advice you'll hear about marketing and stuff, I mean, everybody knows mileage varies dramatically. In my case, write a new book is the real recipe for it. Eventually, Audible offered to do audio editions. They pitched me a deal for this. This was after my second sci-fi book, Rich Man's War. Amazon Publishing made me an offer for the first 2 sci-fi books, and I said, great, sure. So we did that, and then Audible contacted me and said, we would like to do audio versions of your books. And I said, which books? They said, the sci-fi. Too late. I've got these others, and they said, sure. It turns out the audio for the fantasy series has done much, much better than the full relaunch of the sci-fi series. And I can't quite account for that. I can tell you Tess Irondale, my narrator, is wonderful, so there is that much. But as far as marketing and such goes, I could not tell you what drove the improvements of one platform over another. People like the sci-fi as books, but the urban fantasy has done really, really well as audio. If that answers your question, and I'm not sure it does.
No, I was actually going to ask you about skyscape,
Skyscape, yes.
skyscraper, something sky.
Yeah.
But that's interesting about the audio. Are the fantasy ones any longer? The books, are they like bigger books?
Yes, my fantasy stuff is my longest stuff. So the third sci-fi book is the longest in the series, and that checks in at about 170,000 words. And both of the main novels for the fantasy are longer than that. Good Intentions, once I cut it down a ways, was about 180,000. I actually cut out a lot of the erotic content from that original literotica version, and there's still a time. So, which is, of course, its own little weird niche in publishing, is the how much is too much and how upfront of this should you be. But the books are longer, definitely, and that is actually something that Audible, the people I've talked to at Audible have said that they really like, because they've found that a lot of their customers like to binge read, basically. So longer makes them happier, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I've also been told by those guys that because people have their credits and they pay a
Hmm.
flat rate for their credits every month, that if they see a book that's like 30 hours compared to one that's 8 hours or something, they feel they're getting a much better deal. So that could
Absolutely.
definitely help out too.
Yeah.
So when Amazon approached you, did you have any thoughts? I'm not sure I want to give up some of my royalties, or were you just like, oh yeah, print me up?
Um, at the time, it felt like the two sci-fi books had kind of run their course, and so it was kind of like I would be getting getting in advance and regular book money for a book that I'd already made my money on. So it seemed like a way to breathe a little more life into something while I was working on the third book, and I figured, why not? I also did admittedly have the hopes and ambitions of getting traditional published. Um, and so I jumped at it immediately. And to be honest, the editor that I spoke with kind of jumped at it as soon as she had me on the phone. Basically, like, there was the pitch almost immediately, and I said sure. I had been vaguely talking to a couple of agents, but nothing had been signed. And by a couple, I should really say one. I've had like a very brief brush with agents here or there. Usually just people contacting me and saying, hey, who owns the rights to this? And I'd say me, and they'd say, okay, and nothing. And I was having a little more of a conversation with an agent from England who had contacted me at the time, but when Amazon made the pitch at about the same time, it just kind of felt like it was time to jump at it, and I hadn't signed with him or anybody, so.
All right, cool. How has it gone? They did like a relaunch? Is that what they did? Did they do new covers, or were
They
they
did a
sure?
relaunch. All the covers that you've seen are covers that I've arranged. All of that. Those are not the original covers. An artist starting, or an artist, a writer starting out like me could not have. I couldn't afford those covers at the time. I replaced those after the covers for Good Intentions and Poor Man's Fight after Poor Man's Fight did so well, and Poor Man's Fight also lifted Good Intentions. So I wanted to invest in new cover art. I had a photo cover that a buddy of mine had helped me with for basically just for being credited as the artist for Good Intentions when I first put that out, because I had no money at all. I was dealing with a lot of debt and stuff. And that was a real lifesaver and all, because I was looking at what was on Amazon at the time, and I didn't know how to arrange cover art. And I'm kind of a visual arts dummy. I don't have the vocabulary for it. I have since learned some of it, but that was something I had arranged myself. I arranged some more original cover art by an artist for Poor Man's Fight at the time. Then I could, afford a few $100 for it. But then I replaced it all. When Amazon contacted me, I actually asked to hang on to my covers, and they were all about that because they liked my covers too. They had sold. So yeah, the cover art was all there. But Amazon took care of the rest of. They did a copy edit They did not do any kind of development editing. They wanted to keep the story the way it was, which made me very happy. And Skyscape is a YA label. And so when they approached me and said they wanted Poor Man's Fight and Rich Man's War, I said, so there's a lot of swearing and face stabbing. Are you sure? And they said, yeah, absolutely, that's fine. And I said, okay. And that has never really been a topic since. And then I didn't really write to a YA audience. I thought I was writing to a sci-fi audience in my head. But I had a young protagonist, and that is really the key to being YA, so we went with it.
All right, cool. I've talked to a couple people that kind of have the same thing where they went with Amazon for like the first couple books in a series, and then for whatever reason Amazon didn't renew things, so they have the rights to do the rest of their series, but then they're kind of like, they can't discount book one on their own for their own sales, so they're kind of relying on Amazon. Have you any bad experiences there, or are you pretty still?
Well, I'm sorry. That is exactly my experience. So book one and book two relaunched. They did okay for a little while and fell off really quickly. And it was going to be a while before I put a third book out. We relaunched in June of 2015, and they relaunched about 2 weeks apart. And Amazon wanted me to leave them up as right up until the relaunch, and so we took them down and then put up the Amazon versions, which, like I said, the only difference was a copy edit, and now we had different printings of the book, of the physical books and the audio. But I take that back. We held off on the audio for a while because we wanted to do a re-recording to correct some stuff. So it didn't launch all right away. The audio came out and it staggered. But when I finished the manuscript for book three, I sent that in November, and by December I heard back from them, and they said that they liked the book a lot, but the sales just didn't support a third book by their accounting. That was disappointing. And I had a long talk with a couple of editors. I actually talked to 47 North too, who's their sci-fi editors, because they had said this is really, the books quickly transitioned to an adult sci-fi book. And so I think they had discussions about maybe moving me over there. I don't actually know, but that was who I talked with. And I got the sense that it really was driven by sales. I have a feeling that if they could have told me the book isn't very good, go back to the drawing board, I think that would have actually been an easier conversation for them, because that's just what editors do. So yeah, but I was free to self-publish, and I did. And Audible said that they'd be happy to pick it up as an audio version on their own, and so that'll be coming out real soon. I don't have a date yet. I have a tentative date for mid-June, but I don't have that in writing. So. But I went ahead and relaunched on my own, and I did about as well as I could have expected out of an advance, certainly. So better than that, really.
Yeah, I just looked at the first two books on Amazon, and they're still under 10,000 sales ranking in the whole store. So I don't know what they were doing then when you were talking with them, but it's like, gosh, if you're just not in the top 100, we don't want to talk to you.
It wasn't. The rankings and sales, in my experience, are. I mean, there's that huge gap, right? It depends. Those rankings can be weird during the time of year. Sometimes my ranking, I've seen it be really high, and yet the sales don't seem all that impressive. That happened especially when I launched the second sci-fi book. When I first self-published it, I was hitting almost the same rankings as the first book, but the sales weren't. They were not really the same as the first book's numbers. This happened a week after Kindle Unlimited started, and I did not opt into Kindle Unlimited, so I don't know if that actually had an effect or not. I mean, this was KU 1.0, and I didn't like that idea. I went wide, but it was also August, and so people told me, well, there's the summer slump, and I thought, oh, there's a summer slump. There's a time to do this stuff. I was a real dummy about all this marketing stuff. I hardly looked into that at all, and I have only been educating myself as time has gone on.
Yeah, Kindle Unlimited, definitely. Right from the beginning, you kind of got that sales ranking boosts where you're getting the borrows. Because I've had
Hmm.
the experience too. I finally
Hmm.
have a series in KU, and this, the sales are be like even with another book I have that's not in KU, but the book that's in it, the sales ranking is way better because it's just getting
Yeah,
so many boosts from the borrows.
yeah. I mean, I wish we all knew what the math was on that, but it seems to help, at least on Amazon. So,
Yeah.
but then
All right.
Amazon's all you've got.
Let me pass you to Joe to ask a few more questions, and then we'll jump into marketing a little bit later.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So we've spoken to a handful of authors now who bridge sci-fi and fantasy with their stuff.
Hmm.
Do you consider either of those genres to be your main interest, or you sort of balance between them?
Oh, I so Poor Man's Fight was the series that I had always wanted to write, and my fantasy stuff was the genre that just it was the series that just seemed to work well, and I the characters really spoke to me, but I just kind of stumbled into it. Um, if I have a main, it's probably the sci-fi because that is definitely more work, and I feel like it's a little more serious. Um, I try harder to I try harder for I don't want to say realism because nonsense lasers and space pirates, um, but at the same time it is definitely something I work at with more discipline. The fantasy stuff is supposed to be just a fun book. So yeah, I guess I'm more of a sci-fi guy, but I do seem to crank the fantasy out faster. It's also the world building's much easier when you're already in urban fantasy, and so you can just say a car is a car. When you're writing sci-fi, you have to stop and think. It's futuristic sci-fi, so you have to stop and think: do I need to describe the car, or can I just say car and let that go? And that's a constant question with sci-fi.
Yeah, it's true, and that's actually sort of interesting because like your fantasy is urban fantasy, so you're
Mhm.
closer to reality with that, whereas my fantasy is like secondary world fantasy, so I have the exact opposite situation. I write sci-fi and fantasy as well, and my
Mhm.
cultural context is much closer in the sci-fi.
Yeah,
Interesting. So you can go either way with that.
there is that. I liked the approach that the Battlestar Galactica reboot took of by default, the more things change, the more they stay the same, and so everybody's still wearing suits, and you see cars that have tires, and not everything hovers over the ground or something like that. And they build buildings with actual bricks. I really liked that, and so I wrote hoping that that would be kind of the implied conceit of my books. But if people imagine it differently, I mean, hey, more power to them.
Yeah, it's also interesting. Like the hope is that people would go along with that, and it's funny because of how many people like you'll never find something that everyone goes along with. You can
Oh
find
yeah.
a thing where like 85% are like, oh yeah, this is excellent, and then you'll get the random 2-star review where it's like not future enough. That's not what the future is like.
um, some of my bad reviews make me really happy.
If I'm making that person upset, I must be doing something right.
Usually that comes down to politics or inclusion.
Hmm.
I care a lot about diversity and inclusion, and I don't think I'm deliberately writing to that, but it's kind of a constant thing in my head that I care a lot about. And so when you get the person who's saying that, oh, he's just doing this to for the political correctness checkbox or something like that, I think no, actually, I really care about this, but whatever. Um, I've I've been told that my books read like they were written by Nancy Pelosi's existentialist office aide, and
Well,
I really I
that's
want to
nice.
know what that job is
Yeah.
because I'll apply. I mean, you're working in the office and like, hey, Elliot, can you copy this? Does it really matter? I mean, is anybody gonna care in the end? So,
Yeah. These are high
yeah,
quality reviews right here.
yeah. But I don't get a whole lot of not sciencey enough. Every once in a while, I do. Um, and to be honest, I'm not trying for a lot of like high concept science stuff. My high concept stuff is usually political or economic or social. Spaceships just they give me the venue, they give me the freedom to play with things without having to try to cram everything into a real world setting like a Tom Clancy or something like that, where you have to do a super amount of research, and by the time you're done with it, everything has changed anyway, and the world has moved on. I'm dealing with that with a third fantasy book right now.
Yeah.
I'm doing a little bit of travel in this one, and so I'm trying to keep it current, and events are changing on the ground as we speak where I'm writing, so it's happening.
Yeah, it's complicated. The closer to reality you get, the harder it is to write anything, which is why
Yeah,
I write sci-fi and fantasy.
me too.
Now, speaking of keeping things close to reality, bachelor's degree in history, right?
Yes.
I would imagine that's given you a deeper social context than many authors, or at least a steadier footing. Does history serve as inspiration for any of your stuff?
Absolutely. So Poor Man's Fight is I like to my tagline for it is that it's all student debt and space pirates. But again, I've worked in education a long time, so things like standardized testing and academic concerns are a big thing for me. And being a history major, I'm big on research. The space pirates of Poor Man's Fight are very much modeled on historical examples. The Henry Morgans and other pirates of the actual pirates of the Caribbean, as it were. So they're very democratic. Their behavior with what they do with their loot is more in line with what was done in history, rather than the bury it in the sand nonsense that you see in a lot of movies. The more I read about how actual pirates behaved, the more sense it made, and the more appalled I was by what I've seen in the media. So I wanted to write to that. So yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm like I'm not so I'm not so grounded in history that I can rattle off names and dates and facts like a lot of professional historians. But I appreciate the research skills, and I appreciate the asking the questions and not taking things for granted that I got from that. And I hope that comes through in my books. That's kind of up to the reader whether or not I succeeded at that or not.
Well, yeah, that's always the case, and it's like I was talking to someone recently about how history is something like history is useful for a writer because everything in history happened for a reason.
Yes.
It's like people behave in a way because they behave in that way, and if you understand that, then you can write convincing characters who behave in that way.
Yes.
All right, so I had a question about audiobooks, but that was covered.
Okay.
So we're going to move into the Jeff questions now.
Okay.
So now imagine I'm Jeff.
All right.
Considering your experience with Seattle's Comic-Con, being an indie author yourself, would you recommend other indie authors get involved?
If you can. So getting into Comic-Cons, getting in as a panelist is a neat trick. You kind of have to have your panel organized and then pitch it as a panel. And this is one of my marketing strategies is actually to do conventions and stuff. So I kind of figured we'd talk about that. But as far as being an indie author, getting a table, I'm not entirely sure. And Reed Pop, don't sue me. I'm not entirely sure that that's where Reed Pop wants to go with their giving out tables. I've never tried to get a table at a con. I dated a craft vendor for a long time, and so I had many experiences of being behind the table at a convention and being a vendor. And now that I'm a writer, I kind of don't want to do that unless I'm with a whole bunch of writers. It's definitely worth it if you can team up with people, even if it's just for the experience, and also the shared costs. You don't want to be stuck behind the table at a convention for the entire time. You need to work in shifts with other people.
Yeah, I mean, at some point you just want to enjoy the convention.
Absolutely. Well, even I had been to events where even getting up and hitting the bathroom was a big risk because, well, my partner's not here. What do I do with all this the swag that's on the table? And you kind of lean on the vendor who's at the table next to you. And I don't want to do that with my writing. So, but if I can team up with other authors, I'll probably give it a try sooner or later. And I met other authors doing that.
Yeah. Keeping up with other authors was actually the second half of the question, so the answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
Okay, with regards to writing sci-fi, have you found that your books follow the standard tropes people expect to find in books of that genre?
Uh, well, I can tell you. So I've been following a lot of discussions on Kboards about how to write to market, things like that, and I have realized that I don't. I write to make myself happy. I did not even think of what the market wanted. I definitely so my protagonist is not he's not the inspiring captain and he's not the cocky fighter pilot. He's the lowest guy in the totem pole and he's stuck with a mop. Um, and I really felt like somebody needed to tell that story. Um, there are a lot of ways in which my sci-fi goes against the grain, but I'm sure you could also find plenty of ways in which they do. Um, I provide space battles that are not they're not quite Star Wars, but they're also not hard sci-fi. Because when you get into real hard sci-fi thinking about how would combat work in space, it usually comes out really boring. And every fight just reads like a foregone conclusion. At least that's what all the serious guys make it sound like. And I didn't want to do that, but I also didn't want to have the Star Wars thing where it's basically World War II dogfights in space, because that's a lot of fun. And I don't fault Star Wars for doing that at all. I go see Star Wars, but I wanted to do something different. So I'm kind of in the middle there. There are tropes that I definitely throw over my shoulder, though. There are the really harmful tropes that I absolutely hate. Bi-erasure and the ones that are really harmful toward different minorities and stuff. I really try hard to make sure I avoid them. What's difficult is you realize the more you pay attention to that, it's not just a minefield. That minefield is layered, and it's like a three-dimensional minefield. And if you back away from one trope, you're going to accidentally back into the other. And I mean bad tropes, because there are good tropes and bad. So yeah, those are things I try to deal with. There's As far as sci-fi tropes, though, I mean, I'm trying to think of examples off the top of my head, and it's hard to know what is enough of a sci-fi trope to talk about.
Well, I mean, at some point, everything is a trope, and that,
Yeah.
like anyone who has visited TV tropes and was able to actually get away from the site eventually, because it's addictive, will
Yeah.
discover that basically the lack of one trope just translates into another trope.
Yeah. Or you just realize that you don't call that trope what TV tropes calls it, but it's there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Do you write your stories as standalones, or do you openly tell the readers that before they try to read the latest in your series, they really should start from the beginning?
Oh, right now they're both series. So the sci-fi has come to an end with the third book right now, but it's an end. It's not the end. It's going to move on, and I need to. The next books are going to be written with more of a standalone idea in mind. You can walk away from the first book and be satisfied and not go to books 2 and 3, except you totally should, because they're great. But I wrote those definitely with a series in mind, and the fantasy I generally wrote as a series. I have a collection of short stories that they're okay as standalones. You don't need a whole lot of context with that, because that was the point. But if you're going to read Fantasy Book 2, you really do need to be at least familiar with Fantasy Book 1.
Do you spend any time at the beginning of a new entry recapping the events of the previous one, or do you rely upon the sort of recollection of your reader?
I rely upon the recollection of the reader. I will make quick references as things go on, but it's a little like the sci-fi info dump. You don't want to do that. You give the reader just enough to follow along, and then you throw out information as it becomes relevant. I do kind of the same with continuity, basically. So books 2 and the eventual book 3 for the fantasy, for instance, they'll reference what happened in book 1, and having had the experience as a reader of jumping into series at the wrong point, I found that approach actually kind of gets me interested in reading the first book, rather than just putting a big warning up front saying, if you haven't read book one, you won't understand what's going on. Um, eh, I'm not too down with that, but ultimately, yeah, it is going to be easier if you read the previous books.
Yeah, I think in my stuff I've gone both ways, and I definitely agree that like the kindest way to reintroduce readers to concepts they need to know is to sort of reintroduce them as those concepts arise.
Mm-hmm. I've realized I need to at least have a cast of characters at the beginning of each book, though, and I've started doing that. Book 3 for the sci-fi has a cast of characters. Book 3 for the fantasy books will also have a cast of characters, and it's a much smaller cast than fantasy, but that just means I can fill it in with a little more information.
That's useful.
Yeah.
Just one last thing before we get into the marketing. Is there anything you wish you had been doing at the time you released your first book that you are doing now?
So much. I mean, I really did just kind of throw things out into the void and figured, okay, well, you know, I'd heard so many discouraging things about how, you know, writing means don't ever quit your day job, you know, and it's only the rock stars who get to quit their day job, which is true. I have not entirely quit education, but I don't do a whole lot of it. The nice thing about subbing is you kind of go when you want to. So most days I do stay home, but I'm not, you know, throwing that away. God, things that I wish I had done ahead of time. I wish I had a Twitter account before the Amazon relaunch. I wished I had been blogging a bit more. I wish I had been a little more thoughtful about a couple of plot elements that, you know, I realized later, that's a little problematic, but they don't ruin the story or anything, but you know, you learn to critique yourself as you go on. But yeah, as far as like having an author platform and stuff, I wish I had actually tried to market, and I didn't do a whole lot of that. So it was really that initial success was really all about timing and the support that I had from that online following from Literotica made a huge difference. They gave things reviews, and so that made it look serious, and then other people were willing to give it a shot.
Yeah, it's amazing how much stuff, like, in the beginning you really, really, really need, and no one tells you that. That's the tricky bit about self-publishing. The only person involved is you.
Yeah. It really is self.
Exactly. And, well, now we're going to get on to marketing and see what we should have been doing all along.
Okay.
All right. Well, you know, you're actually the second author I've heard of that kind of use that Literotica site as a springboard. I think the other one is actually an erotica author, so that makes sense. But she did. I remember she did something where like they had a contest who can write the most short stories in the year or something. So she ended up with this huge backlog of stuff when she actually did start publishing.
Yeah, that contest, the Survivor contest, is insane because it's difficult and it that will force you to write to story categories that really aren't your thing. And I never tried it. I could not. I mean, once my Good Intentions series was actually like the first thing I had ever written with them, and so I just continued on with it. And it wasn't until I was finished that I tried anything else. It's really, really good for you know, we talk about exposure, and there's the giant sin of you know, well, if you're not paying me, then I'm writing for free, and that's you know, crap. But if you're interested in writing as a hobby and you realize that it's, you know, it's good to do some practice type stuff, if you're into, you know, erotica, smut, choose your adjective. You can't beat that site for finding a readership. It's really, really still very busy.
Yeah, it sounds cool. Like, because we've talked to people that have done Wattpad also, and it seems like it can kind of work, but it can be hard to get those people to come over and actually buy the books when you make the switch.
I think it certainly depends on categories and stuff. My understanding is that Wattpad is really great for if you're doing YA. Like that's one of the big audiences there. For Literotica, the the biggest audiences are in a couple of categories that I don't write in, and I don't care to talk about them on a podcast. But they're there, and everybody's got their thing. The sci-fi fantasy audience there was actually very supportive, and they cared about having all of those sci-fi fantasy things, or even just basic storytelling things that you want in anything. They wanted an internally consistent world building. They wanted a plot and character arcs and stuff. The fact that there was going to be a lot of sex along the way, hey, that's great. But but tell me a story. I remember long ago, and sometimes people don't believe this happened, but George Lucas had said, special effect without a story is really kind of a boring thing. These days, people say George Lucas said that, really? But he did, and it's true. And frankly, sex scenes are kind of the same way. A sex scene without context is okay. I mean, that might be cool, but theoretically, something happened before these 2 or 3 or however many people wound up in that room.
All right, well, we'll leave people to guess at what categories are popular. Although we did talk about tentacles last week with Brian Cohen, so our audience may be more knowledgeable than you think.
They don't have that as a specific category, but you can find that as a tag, I'm sure.
If you were just getting started today, do you think you would use a site like that in order to find? Was it kind of a critique site too? Do they give you feedback?
I got a lot of feedback in comments. It actually kind of really. So the difference between writing something in a serial and putting it up online, it's a lot less lonely. At least if you can find a readership, it's a lot less lonely than novel writing. I mean, most of the novels that I've written since then, I've done a lot of banging my head into my desk and, oh my God, is this stupid? Is anybody going to like it at all? Whereas posting things on a site, every time you get a chapter done, you get instant feedback and you get instant gratification. It's a great motivator, and it is a place where people will say, hey, I'd really like to see this happen. And on a few occasions, there were things I hadn't thought of at all. There were characters that became much more important in the narrative because people said, I hope we get to see more of this person or that person. And it really changed the original course of the story, and I think for the better. So I'm glad that happened. So it is a good starting place if you're starting out as a writer. As far as hoping that that's going to be your marketing scheme, I don't know. One of the things I don't like about being a writer is the constant self-promotion. I hate being that guy at the party who has to tell you how great he is, because I hate that guy a lot. But I will say I did do really well on that site, and so I had a big following. It's not like they all bought my book, not even close to all of them, but it was enough to give it a bump in visibility, and then other people saw, hey, this book is selling. It's probably not this guy's mom buying all 20 copies, so let's see what it is. And that was helpful. Whether or not everybody else, should follow in those footsteps, I don't know. It depends on the site. It depends on what you're going to write. But it is kind of my default advice is to, find some place you like to write, build a following online, and find your voice and build a following online at the same time. Because if you get people following your stuff, they'll support you when you move over to writing for money.
Yeah, I know. One of the things people really struggle with that first book when they don't have any readers yet is just getting the reviews that you even need to get into like these sites that ENT and places that say you got to have 10 or 20 reviews before you can buy a sponsorship to run a sale and stuff.
Yeah, a lot of other writers had asked me, how did you get so many reviews? Good Intentions had 100 reviews really fast, from what I remember. And all I could say is I had a lot of really supportive people from where I had transitioned over, and I kind of owe them everything. I'm still very, very grateful for that. How Poor Man's Fight got so many reviews, I don't know. I wish I could tell people. I would do more of it deliberately myself. Some of it I think was timing of when it released and stuff, but at the same time, I have asked people nicely, hey, reviews help, and they've responded, but that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, it's important to remember, and a lot of people forget this too, that reviews are a byproduct of selling a lot of books. So
Yes.
you're going to get them if you manage to sell a lot of books, but it can definitely be hard in the beginning when you're not selling any books yet.
Yeah, that's true.
Have you struggled at all with writing in two genres at the same time? I mean, I know a lot of sci-fi fantasy people will kind of cross over and enjoy both, but has that been a challenge at all?
Um, so my two main protagonists have several things in common that I'm always concerned that are bleeding over and they'll become the same person, and I don't want that at all. Both of them are they're new adults, as we say. It's that 18 to 25 range. So 19 and scared seems to be where I live as a writer. Most of my characters are the constant theme through all of my stuff is, oh my God, how am I going to pay for college? Whether it's sci-fi or fantasy, everybody's kind of gripped with that. But as far as other than keeping them separate, no, it helped me a lot to switch back and forth from one to the other. I did Rich Man's War and Dead Man's Dead, that's the second and third sci-fi books. I did those back to back. And that actually made, I think, the third sci-fi book harder because I didn't, have a palate cleanser, basically. I think that probably made it take a little longer. So it's, for me, shifting gears is actually nice. It's a creative change of pace.
Have you had any trouble like keeping the sales momentum going? Like, because I know I know myself, I have several series going.
So,
If you leave one off and don't publish a new book in that one for a year, then things tend to fall off. Have you had that experience too?
oh, absolutely, absolutely. I've noticed how fast you publish, and seeing other authors on keyboards and stuff publish fast. I don't know how to write that fast. I write longer books though. If I'm trying to teach myself to write shorter books because then I would publish more frequently. But that just doesn't seem to be my natural inclination. When I hear people say that they've written a novel and it's 90,000 words, I'm like, how? I don't understand. And then I read the book, I'm like, it's a full book. I don't get it. But wow, I've lost my train of thought. Yeah,
I was going to talk later, and all of his are like 150,000 words too. So
who is
Joe.
Oh yeah.
You'll understand. And my first series, they were all over 100,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to go short, I have to like really cut down to like max of 2 POV characters, and
Mm-hmm.
so that,
Yeah.
or even one can. I mean, for me, that'll make things a lot easier. And there's nothing wrong with long books; people enjoy them. But you're right;
Sure.
it's harder to get them out as quickly.
Sure. Well, and the other thing too is there's an awkward thing that happens to price when you're putting out long books for that same $2.99 to $4.99, $5.99 range that a lot of indie authors do, because then when you want to put out a short book and it's $2.99, everybody's like, but this was only 40,000 words. What the hell's going on? And I'm like, well, I wrote a book. So that happens.
Yeah, and you can't necessarily charge a whole lot more just because it's 200,000 words. Because I've got one of those beasts too, and I made it $5.95 or $5.99 or something. But yeah, it's more efficient to do it shorter if you can.
Yeah, definitely. Keeping sales momentum up though is when you're bouncing between one and the other is definitely harder. I mean, the sci-fi is definitely a much bigger seller for me, but the fantasy has an audience, and for a long time I didn't even really track how things were selling, and I finally took a step back. I said, okay, I'm gonna take a day or two off the writing because I always felt like I should just be writing more, and I did the math. I tallied everything into a spreadsheet, and I realized that, okay, so the fantasy sells about half as well as the sci-fi, but that's still not the kind of sales you sneeze at, and a lot of people would be very grateful to have that kind of sales, so I keep up with it. And plus, it makes me happy. I mean, ultimately, I'm writing for myself, first, so it seems worthwhile, even if it's, even if I wind up with a bit of a dip of sales. I prioritize putting out a book that I'm happy with above the rest, because I kept that discipline of don't quit your day job, until it actually is costing you money, as I think Scalzi had said. You don't quit when you're a writer. You don't quit your day job until your day job is actually costing you money. So.
Yeah, and so much of this is cyclical. A lot of people get that early success and they're like, oh, I can quit my day job. I'm making tons. And, 6 months later, oh, where'd all the
Yes.
money go?
Yes. Well, and the market is evolving so fast too. I mean, the amount of change I saw between putting out the first sci-fi and the second sci-fi was huge. I mean, the fact that I had original illustration on Poor Man's Fight at all was a big difference. And now I'm seeing more and more high quality illustrations. Whereas when I first put that out, I mean, everybody was just grabbing whatever stock photo they could and slapping a title onto it. You can't get away with that anymore.
Yeah, there's like 3 space stations on Shutterstock or whatever that site is,
Yeah.
and I've seen them a lot on the various book covers for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question for me. It sounds like you started out wide and that you might prefer to be on all the stores, but right now it looks like you're in KDP Select. What made you
Yes.
decide that, and are you liking that right now, or?
So it was an experiment. When I signed away the first couple of books for the sci-fi, I mean, that was just part of the deal, was that they were going to go on Kindle Unlimited. So having the third sci-fi book up there seems like a no-brainer. But it wasn't until it was the last day of last year, so December 31st, I said, what the heck, I'll try with Kindle Unlimited. I'll try it out with my fantasy books. And so Good Intentions had been out wide since 2011. In the first month that I was on KU, I made more money on KU than I had the entire time my books were wide for all the other vendors. So, I mean, every other vendors had always been kind of a trickle compared to Amazon. But the fact that KU could make me as much money as in a month as being wide had made me over the course of years really had a huge impact. Even now, I don't know if I'm going to stay in it though, because there's the longevity concern. Not everybody goes and shops at Amazon, so I'm trying it out now, but I may very well pull out of KU with the fantasy books when that term is up, which is actually coming up here pretty soon. I'm going to sit and stare at numbers and do some really deep thinking on it, and then probably flip a coin.
That's how all financial decisions should be made.
Right.
Sounds good to me. But I'm actually curious, because you have such long books. Are you making as much on the borrows as you are in the sales? For
the novels, yes. In fact, probably more. When you've got a nice long book, you might put it. Good Intentions is, I think, $3, and the sequel is $4. But depending on what the payout is that month, and we never know what the payout's going to be. But having done the math, yeah, I actually make more money on a full read than I do on somebody buying the book. The question then becomes, I don't know how many people are actually reading it all the way through, and that's one of the dissatisfying things about KU, because a sale is a sale, and you understand, of course, that somebody buys a book and some people never actually read it. But all I get for KU is a page count, and so I don't know how many people are trying it for 20 pages and saying this isn't for me, and how many people read it all the way through. I wish there was an actual finish line, even if it was just for the sake of, vanity or satisfaction or whatever, knowing how many people read through. The only real sign of that is how many people read the sequel.
Yeah, it's hard to say no to Amazon's offerings right now, but I also like the idea of being one.
Yeah, it is. I think, was it Nick Webb was on your show and said that KU is really the second biggest bookstore in the world? Somebody had said that, and that's really true, and that is very compelling. I actually was reluctant to sign on to KU for a long time because I just didn't like the model, and I wasn't comfortable with it, from a standpoint of, are we going to slam everybody into this? But I actually had a reader ask me if I was ever going to do it because he was on a fixed income, and so KU really helped him out. That actually gave me pause more so than anything else, even more so than the question of profits. That was kind of the thing that motivated me to give it a shot. And then the profits happened. I'm like, oh, well, this is serious. I don't know what to do now. So.
All right, cool. Well, I'm going to hand you to Joe/Jeff to for the rest of the questions.
Yep. Just on the subject of writing long and not being able to write short, I literally today I tweeted an intention to write a 10,000-word short story, and I was like, let's see how this goes. And so far, the over/under is 20,000 words.
Every time I can actually keep a story short, I'm super proud of myself.
Yeah.
That's more of an achievement than writing a novel. But
it really is.
Yeah, but that comes down to inspiration of, okay, no, I can keep this simple. Just write it and be done. If I can pull it off, great. Usually it becomes a bigger story, and then I kick myself.
I want to say, I think it was Winston Churchill who was talking about a history that he had written, and he said, if I'd had more time, it would have been shorter. Anyway, on to the questions.
Sure.
We spoke a little bit about launch frequency and how it can help you, and you've sort of been on both sides of this because since you relaunched Poor Man's Fight, you had 2 launches in essentially 2 weeks, right? Pretty rapid,
yes.
same month at least.
Yes, I mean Amazon did, but they were relaunches, and it's it's that trick of getting people to buy the same book twice. And the other thing is, so all those things when Amazon relaunches you, that's the downside to signing with a label is that all of those things that indie authors can do for visibility, a lot of them you can't. And it's funny how many, as I've been trying to educate myself on marketing, how many things I'm shut out of, either because I don't have control of pricing or anything for books 1 and 2 for that series, versus the fantasy stuff has erotic content. And I try really hard to be upfront about that. In fact, my warning labels, I think, are one of my best selling points. But I also I believe in trigger warnings, and I believe in letting people know what they're getting. Sadly,
it's a good way to avoid bad reviews.
You'd think.
As long as people read the warnings.
I'm so proud of those warnings, and yet I would say most of my bad reviews are people who didn't look at the warning or didn't take it seriously. And I'm really, really lucky with the reviews I had, so I don't want to sound like I'm complaining or anything, but it is. I'd have an amazing review average, I think, if people actually heeded those warnings, because some people just don't want to read that, and I don't blame them. But there's always going to be that person who walks into Star Wars and then comes out and like, well, I hate spaceships, but you knew.
Did you see anything about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's tricky, and we've spoken in the past about how it seems like lots of people completely ignore blurbs.
Yeah, I can't. I'm not that kind of reader. I need a blurb. It really bothers me that so many books are published and the back cover is really just quotes from other authors, and they're cuts from reviews about the previous book.
Yeah.
Like, but what's it about? If I can't find out what it's about before I read it, I'm not going to read it.
Yeah, it's making an informed purchasing decision and not buying something based upon its cover.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of covers, we talked a little bit about the topic of cover branding, using your cover for branding, and look, several of your covers are instantly recognizable as part of the same series. But it looks like the most recent Sci-Fi book differs from the previous books in terms of cover design. Was that a conscious decision?
So, my cover artist is Lee Moyer, who's amazing, and he's an established industry pro, and I learn a lot from him. He was actually the one who said you need branding, and he's been the one to kind of guide things. Also, his art has repeatedly changed the events inside my books, and I think, oh, I have to go back and rewrite this now to match this cover. He says it doesn't have to match the cover. Oh no, it does now. But one of the things about if you look online, the titling has changed. That was Amazon's call when they bought 1 and 2. They wanted to redo the titling, redo the title fonts. I liked those original fonts, so I stuck with it. Funny enough, those original fonts are there on the paperback version, but they don't stand out as much on the the JPEG that you see when you're shopping through the store. So that was why Amazon made their decision. It was a tough call, but I just on a personal level, I really liked Lee's original work, and so I decided to stick with that.
It's as good a reason as any.
Yeah.
All right. So, how far ahead have you planned the series? Do you go on a book-by-book basis, or do you sort of have an overall arc in mind?
So for the sci-fi, I had planned things out to the end of the third book. Originally thinking it was one book. Writing taught me, oh no, things need to be. This is how much I'm actually thinking of doing. So all of the climax points were the things that I had imagined, and it was a matter of writing to get to those climax points. For the fantasy, it is really kind of book to book. As I'm writing this third book, I'm seeing more of a sense of how the series can go on and where I can go from here. But the sci-fi kind of had that endpoint. I know where I want to go from there, but that trilogy was kind of the last book in the trilogy was kind of the end of the beginning sort of a thing for a long sprawling epic. I grew up on comic books, and so I like really long series. A lot of people feel like the pinnacle and of storytelling is a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you're done. And I'm like, no, I want to know what happened tomorrow. So they'll keep going. Yeah, they'll keep going until I'm done.
That's my plan as well. It seems like there's a tremendous market for books that continue where other books would have stopped. They say that The Walking Dead was created because he was more interested in what happens after the zombie attack than during the zombie attack.
Yeah.
All right, now we're on to Jeff's questions.
Okay.
Continuing from Joe's last question, how far in advance do you plan your releases? Like we've talked about how you're planning your books. Do you have a release schedule?
No, my release schedule is as soon as it's done, I'm in a giant hurry to get it out. But I'm actually taking advantage of being an indie and not having a publishing cycle like a traditional publisher. I have that freedom to polish a book until I feel like it's done. I'm in a hurry. I can promise everybody that because there's nothing like actually getting a book out. As soon as I think I was out. I had a book out for about a month, and then I saw other books coming out and thought, oh, I haven't done anything in forever. No, you just released last month, dude. But I don't have a specific cycle. I'm trying really hard to put out 2 books a year. That did not happen last year, but the relaunching kind of tripped me up because that involved a lot of copy editing and stuff like that just ate up more time than I expected.
Yeah. Do you alternate? Is it your plan to alternate between series, or go with what's selling best?
It's my plan to alternate until and unless inspiration strikes. And there are things I want to. I mean, there's more genres I want to do than just sci-fi fantasy. Or space fantasy, I should say. I mean, I want to do a post-apocalyptic. I would really love to do a historical fantasy at some point. But money is certainly a motivator. Sales is a motivator, and the sci-fi sells better. So right now, I feel like it's for the foreseeable future. I'm going to be alternating back and forth. As soon as I get done with the next fantasy book, it's going to be time for the next sci-fi book. Yeah.
All right. Of all the marketing promotion strategies that you've used to sell your books, have any outperformed your expectation?
So. Well, like I said, I can't do a lot of the conventional ones that we talk about in Kay boards and other indie author forums. The thing that outperformed for me, and this is another one where it's difficult to track of whether or not the promotion actually drove things. When I put out the second sci-fi book, I decided I really wanted to do a charity thing with the first book. So I kind of announced on my blog, and I put in the blurb for the first book that while to celebrate book 2 coming out, all my profits from book 1 for the first 6 weeks are going to go to a veterans charity. They went to the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. That turned out to be a lot of money. as book charity donations go, I wound up donating $7,000, which is a lot of money if you consider what you could get for marketing with that. But was I doing that for marketing? No, I really wanted to do it because if I'm going to be telling all of these, goofy sci-fi shoot 'em up stories, I should do something to support people who've had to live through actual war. So I felt very strongly about that. I don't know for sure that drove sales, but it certainly got me a lot of reader goodwill. I heard back from a lot of people who really appreciated that, and I suspect they were interested in spreading the word. Again, that wasn't entirely my goal. I had a feeling that as soon as I put out book 2, book 1 would get a bump. I mean, that's just kind of standard once you've got a decent audience size. And so I wanted to do something useful with that. But there's that. You can't do the survey of why did you buy this book, because charity or just because it came up on the recommended reads thing. I don't know, but I heard from a lot of people who really appreciated that, and that was one of the best things I've been able to do with my writing. I would love to do it again sometime.
Excellent. I think that's a first for the show. I don't think we've ever heard anyone who tried that.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of structure. My biggest concern was transparency. I'll try not to get political here, but to my thinking, if you're going to do a charity thing for such as veterans, the first thing you should have in mind is showing people how you're generating the money, how you're doing the math, and where it's going to go, and then show them the receipts immediately. I couldn't wait to the IAVA, and I didn't have a relationship with them or anything. It's not like they endorsed my book, but they did send me a nice thank you letter, and I put that on my blog as soon as I possibly could because I just wanted people to know it wasn't a scam. One of the frustrating things about indie publishing and marketing, especially when I first started out, everything looked like a scam. And to some extent it still does. I mean, I rely on other indie authors to tell me whether or not a promotion is legit before I'll do it, because man, so much of it just looks like it's just there to rip off your money, and so much of it is. It's very frustrating.
Yeah. And on the subject of transparency for the charity thing, you were talking about it got you a lot of goodwill to do the charity. Nothing will lose you goodwill faster than seeming like you're doing something shady in the name of charity.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, just one last question. Social networking, pro or con?
As far as having a presence on Twitter, Facebook, stuff like that,
yeah.
I'm definitely for it. It's funny. Everybody will tell you you need to be on Twitter to market, and then as soon as you get on Twitter, the first thing you hear is, okay, don't market on Twitter. Use that to just be a happy-go-lucky author and let people like you as a person. Twitter has become my platform for angry political retweeting, but I try to talk authoring stuff. Facebook seems to be the platform where people really do want to hear about book stuff, and I get much more of a reaction for that than I do talking about anything else, in daily life, or did you like the new Captain America movie, stuff like that. Talking about that doesn't seem to generate as much of a response as actually saying, hey, so I'm actually working on this book for real, guys. And I do not have the huge following that a lot of other indie authors have, but I'm kind of a social networking junkie anyway. I mean, I'm on Facebook all day long, with my private personal account, so it's not too hard.
Yeah, it's amazing how certain social networks seem to lend themselves to certain types of discourse, and I think really it comes down to like the length of the posts that people are willing to tolerate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a blog, and because I have my own website, but I don't update it nearly enough because I need to actually have something to say before I post. And frequently I feel like I don't, or I will second guess myself on, well, do I want to do that? This is a little too political, or this is more about the day job and I don't want to talk about that. I don't like to have a lot of crossover there. In fact, no crossover at all between my day job and my writing is my ideal. So I have the blog, but I don't make as much use of it as a lot of other authors do. I feel like I should be investing that time in actually writing and putting together the next book.
Yeah, you only have so many words in you in any given day, and you don't want to spend too many of them on just, update.
Yeah. I used to do a lot of tabletop fantasy or tabletop role-playing games and stuff, and I found that I have to budget my creative energy. I can't do as much of that anymore.
Yeah. That concludes the questions. I'm going to just hand you back to Lindsay for closing stuff.
Okay.
Sure. Is there any parting advice you have for people that are maybe just starting out now as far as marketing and publishing goes?
So have the Twitter account and the Facebook page and stuff ready to go before you launch. That's good, and don't be sad if things don't pick up right away. And also don't underrate the importance of the things that you've done before. If you're that fanfic writer who's a little embarrassed about your fanfic or stuff like that, but you want to put out your original fiction book, don't run away from that. In fact, you should run toward it. You should leverage that audience as best you can, because that's how it works. Whatever platform you've got, use it.
All right, sounds good. And where can people find you online? And is there any one of your books in particular they should check out?
So my website is elliottk.com, 2 L's, 2 T's. And I think the best place to start is Poor Man's Fight. It's the most accessible book. If you're into something lighthearted and you're good with reading erotic content, I then absolutely go for Good Intentions. But I would say Poor Man's Fight is the tighter, more polished book. That is kind of if I was going to give anybody an introduction to me as a writer, that's where I'd like them to start.
All right, sounds good. We will put the links in the show notes, episode 85, marketingsff.com, or you guys can find us on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, all the usual places. Thanks for being on tonight, Elliott, and thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
So long, everybody.